Hello everyone, I'm your host Amartya Singh, the co-founder and CEO of Inflow, a product built by and for modern finance teams. We are back with the eighth episode of our podcast Inside the CFO Office, an exclusive channel for finance professionals to know more about the journeys of finance leaders in the CFO office and the biggest challenges they have faced and how they have gone about solving it, and especially their take on the future of finance. In today's episode, we focus on the role of a CFO and finance leader in growth beyond Series A. We're excited to welcome Jon Gross to share his extensive experience in finance leadership roles at startups with a career that spans multiple industries over 1.5 decades, including health, investment banking, manufacturing, insurance, and others. Jon has driven business across multiple growth stages. Currently, Jon serves as a CFO at RepeatMD. RepeatMD is an innovative platform that automates revenue generation for businesses in aesthetic and wellness practices. In previous roles, Jon has led finance leadership at firms like Keen, Redesign Health, the Riverside Company, Piper Jaffray, and many other firms. What's special is his experience across CFO, M&A, Ops, data, and multiple other functions. So, yeah, welcome, Jon. Looking forward to having a great conversation with you today.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks so much for having me. I know when you reached out, this is a subject matter that's near and dear to my heart, and excited to jump in.
Thanks, Jon. So I think jumping right into the podcast, your journey has been really fascinating, right? And you have gone from a proper property management intern to a finance leader to a CFO. So would love to know more about how has been your journey and what were the challenges that you have faced across your journey.
Awesome. Well, thanks for having me. So my name is Jon Gross, the CFO of RepeatMD. I've been in the seat now for coming up on 14 months. So our platform helps practices sell more cash-based services to their patients through their own mobile app on the App Store. So we give customers the ability to create white label rewards programs, memberships, treatment packages, and also offer their patients patient financing through our exclusive partnership with Affirm. So you can think about it as the Starbucks app, but with the practice's branding to preserve their brand, build their brand, and retain and monetize their patients more. We're focusing exclusively on cash-based services, so related to aesthetics and things of that nature. Our customers are primarily in the aesthetics and wellness space. We also work with dental practices, cosmetic dermatologists, and other related practices as well. My background, I started my career in investment banking and private equity, so on the investing side of the house, but then I spent the last 7 years in various operating roles, as you mentioned, as CFO previously, but also in M&A roles, in data roles, and in ops roles that have really helped me become a more well-rounded financial operator, which we can get into through this podcast. And yeah, I'm excited for the discussion.
Great. Thanks, Jon. And I think, from the perspective of your career, right, you have worked across multiple roles and you have worked across multiple companies in investment banking, health, manufacturing, multiple sectors, right? Would love to know what are the two biggest challenges that you have faced in your career.
So I'd say that there are stories from every stop on the road. It's hard to pick two, but I'll focus on a couple of macro conditions, and I'll cite the two examples, but then kind of what you learn and what the takeaway is along the way. One of them was actually during COVID. I was working at a manufacturing business at the time. This was right around the time that we were a B2B business selling to retail brands. A lot of their distribution channels were stopped. We were feeling a lot of the pressure from that. It was right around the time that PPP loans were coming out. We were looking to bridge cash for payroll to make sure that folks stayed employed and to make sure that we were able to continue our operations. We actually, on very short notice, were able to sell some of our excess equipment in the manufacturing plant at auction to help give us cash to bridge, in addition to the PPP loan, to make sure that we were also able to make it through that. And then back in March of 23, was also very involved with, or impacted by the Signature Bank, SVB, First Republic, banking unrest that, was very challenging to make sure that we made it through. And then we have stability on the other side and liquidity for us to continue running the business. We actually, at RepeatMD, we bank with SVB now. They're fantastic partners and would highly recommend them to everyone, but that was definitely a harrowing stretch, in a couple 100 hours that I'll probably never get back. So I think a lot of it, the takeaway for me is that, hard times really make you the most resourceful, and actually you learn a lot along the way. And you also get very good at 13-week cash flow models and understanding the details of every aspect of your business. I was fortunate enough to learn this lesson early. and something that I do for companies that I join or I work with, but be very conscious of cost categories. We talk about growth, but part of my role as CFO is to understand, and bucketing our costs into certain categories. Think about it in terms of fixed versus variable cost, somewhere in between, whether it's revenue generating or not, but also the timeline or the cost to turn it off, right? There's always more room for improvement and margin of error when you have that baseline set of information, but we can do a whole separate segment on that. I won't spend the time talking about that, but that's a great question. Thanks for asking.
No, great. I love your answer, right? I mean, if you see from the perspective of CFO and a finance leader, right? I mean, the hard times, I believe, in my opinion, is faced the most by the CFO and finance leaders, because hard times ultimately has an impact on the cash that you have and what kind of growth that you're seeing, right? And if you see, cash flows are the most important things in any company's health. And from that perspective, hard times means an impact on the cash flows. And the two answers that you gave were really brilliant, because that underlines the importance. The first challenge that you talked about, with regards to you needing the cash for payroll and going ahead with the auction for the excess equipment and managing the finances, and that must not have been an easy decision for you and the entire company to take. And great that it worked out, and great that you had that lifeline.
Well, it definitely develops the fortitude for going through those hard times, right? And I think like I said, the takeaway is like controlling what you can control. You can't always control macro conditions, but you can certainly control understanding your business at a deep level, being prepared with that information to help you navigate through. A lot of our counterparts look to us as finance leaders to help navigate them through the storms. So
Right.
preparation is key in all that respect.
Yeah, right. And I mean, and also the second answer that you gave, second challenge that you had faced, right, with regards to the entire SVB banking crisis, the entire things that went on to the issues, right? And it was very hard times even for me and for multiple other firms that were there, that were caught up in that melee. And it was really important because, more important than the solution was the chaos around it, right? You really did not know what to do about it. And, at that point of time, it was more about the uncertainty. And as you rightly pointed out, right, the macro uncertainties are a lot. When you look at them at the beginning, it looks very big, but once you start understanding, start figuring out, and you break it down into smaller problem statement, it starts making more sense. So moving to the next question, right, we talked about it, right? And a firm, a company goes through multiple stages. So there is a startup level, the company goes on to do a series A, series B, series C, series D, or sometimes companies go bootstrap, they go to an IPO, and to a potential exit like an M&A, right? I mean, you have worked across companies, at startup as well as series A and beyond. What I would love to know is that how do you see the role of a CFO panning out, right? While sales has its own growth cycle, tech has its own growth cycle, operations has its own growth cycle, but I believe one of the most important and most critical growth cycles is of a finance leader or the finance teams that work across, right? How do you see that role panning out when a firm starts growing beyond a series A and beyond?
Yeah, it's a great question, and as you mentioned, it evolves. So I love Series A, for example. It's the stage that RepeatMD is at now. It's the right mix of product market fit and that you're onto something, but there's still a lot to figure out. There's a lot of building to be done, and frankly, a lot of problem solving, which I really enjoy. I see a big part of my role generally solving for sequencing, right? And what I mean by sequencing is, I try to say when and how as much as possible rather than yes or no. I think that's something that, when you think about guidance for finance professionals, if you say no too often, you're hindering growth in the business. So a lot of it is a sequencing question. And the other thing for Series A startups, largely G&A. So when I talk about G&A, I'm talking about the back office, finance, admin people, generally that eats last. And eats last, sales and marketing driven organization. We're building an amazing product through our R&D organization. It's also balancing, when G&A actually makes resources, because for me, I think about different time horizons. I think about short, medium, and long term. How do I build the foundations for the long term while picking the right spots and the right phases and when to do that, right? Because we're going to talk about systems here in a second. When you do a system upgrade, when have you felt the sufficient pain? How do you articulate that to the organization as far as, when is the right time to invest that amount of capital to go to do that? So when I talk about solving short, medium, and long-term problems, I'll give you live examples now. Short term is, we have a Q1 initiative around working capital management. That's something that's right in front of us, opportunity for improvement. Medium term, we're thinking about internationalizing the business. We're planning to launch in Canada this year. That's one, what needs to be true for that. And then as we think about our next, capital markets activities, whenever that time is, like, what needs to be true today for us to be well set up from a metrics perspective, from a systems perspective for that. And then long term, which is, I think, what we'll talk about more so later on in this episode, is systems, right? The foundations for how do I make the decisions today to never have to make certain system upgrades ever again, right?
Right.
How do we build the foundations for scale for 10 years down the road, right? What is the right decision? So we're putting the effort, going very deep, getting it done, and then building that foundation for scale, which again, I think the brand of a finance leader is very much related to data, no matter how you slice it.
Right. I think, well, I mean, two things very interesting. I found three things actually that the biggest takeaways from my side. One was, the sequencing aspect of it, right? The answer to doing anything, taking any decision, whether you should invest in a project, whether you should invest in manpower, whether you should invest in kind of taking a P&L hit for a specific onboarding a customer account, taking any kind of decisions, right? It's not really about a yes or no, it's about when and how. And I mean, that's very progressive from a finance leader's perspective, because I've been a business leadership perspective, I've been in the sales leader at some point of time in my life, and I always believe that having that understanding from the CFO and the finance leader goes a lot in you being supported in taking multiple decisions. So be it a sales leader, be it a marketing leader, be it an ops leader, it really helps, because yes or no is not the way to go, rather than when and how. So I love that answer, love that approach. And the other approach I loved is the short term, medium term, long term. And thanks for really clearly categorizing, clearly defining what you mean by short term, medium term, long term. All three makes a lot of sense, and thanks for sharing that. And the third, and one of the most important aspects also which you covered, was the communication with regard to the entire team, right? It's not only about your vision that you're planning, it's also taking the concurrence of multiple other business leaders, into driving the kind of financial goals that you want to achieve.
Ultimately, finance's job is to support the rest of the business, right? And
Yeah.
my job is to the best of my abilities, make life easier for other folks in the organization and our leaders, not more difficult.
Right. I think that also is about cooperating and unlocking them for greater growth rather than impeding the growth. So that's a great mindset as a finance leader. So we'll move to the next question, and that's a very interesting question, right? You have worked in the operations side, you've worked in corporate development side, you've worked as a chief of staff, you've worked in a finance role, and you touched a little bit briefly about it. These all roles have shaped in your overall understanding of the company's specific roles and how should you go about it, in driving the growth. But love to know from you, how has been your journey across these roles, and how it has helped you to become a better finance leader.
I think the journey has very much been intentional. I think, in general career development, you want to make sure that you're, scratching the itches and exploring different paths. But I also think, I've always had the mindset of coming back to being a financial operator, whether it's as an investor or an operator. But I think the goal of that is to develop range, which I think is so important for any finance professional, is, the ability to solve a wider range of problems, whether you're actually the one solving it, or for me, sitting in the CFO seat, knowing enough about the details of the related functions that help me with my decision making, and can spot things that may be coming down the pipeline. For one example is with respect to data. One of the companies I helped put in the iSuite, we totally redid the data architecture. It's been very helpful as we've done our, or that we're in the midst of doing our CPQ and Netsuite project right now, which I'm sure we'll talk about here in a few minutes. But understanding, seeing around corners, being able to understand how the pieces fit together has been incredibly important for me. So that's, data, we talked about ops, and then M&A background. I think it's a balance also of internal and external facing skills, right? A lot of those have, as a CFO, you're going to be talking to investors one day, be talking to your leaders another day. So having that full spectrum. I've made cold calls, I've sold, I've done the email drip sequences, I've done the contracts with the lawyers, I get it, right? And I think that helps when working with other folks in the organization, and always coming with that mindset of, how can I help you? I've been in your shoes, how can I help? Right. So with that lens, I think all of those stops along the road have helped round out that skill set, and really have been very helpful in where I am today.
I think I've also experienced that, the way I mean, personally, personal load, our conversations have also panned out. Really appreciate, your openness and your approach to things. It's very new, it's very unique. It opens up multiple scenarios, and I can see that you must be applying it on multiple great ways in the companies that you have worked with, because ultimately everybody is working as a team, and that really helps, in terms of deriving. Especially, I mean, if you see over the past many years and over the past multiple decades, right? Finance leadership roles have really evolved in today's date. Right now, you were talking a lot about systems also, how systems are put together. We're going to cover it later on, as well as when we went into system. But I think as a finance person, technology is important, operations is important. Your approach to string along multiple functions and derive the best benefit out of it. So love the answer. Right, moving on to the next question, and this is one of my favorite questions: how the overall code to cash has really evolved. Right, we talked a little bit about the CPQ process, and there's the order management, there is invoicing, there is disputes, collections, the cash application, and ultimately, you're booking the cash, right? And that's a very interesting space as such to be with. Would love to know what has been your take. I mean, what has been your biggest problems in the entire code to cash processes from a process standpoint, and how did you solve it in technology? Is it technology helped you?
Yeah, so maybe to take a step back to just maybe a bit on my general take and philosophy on systems. I
Yeah,
found through my experience that the fewer systems you have and the fewer connection points and integrations you have, the more likely it is that your data is going to be accurate, it's going to be easy to pull, and you have to carry less cost to maintain. So that's my general preference. And the other caveat is, we're on Salesforce today. We've upgraded now to Salesforce CPQ, which is a project we're working on right now, and we're also in the process of evolving from QuickBooks to NetSuite. So we're
right.
really in the midst of quote to cash. It was very timely that you reached out on this as well. I would say from a quote to cash standpoint, and I saw in the news as well recently that HubSpot had acquired Cashflow. I think, my general take is that I'm surprised that it's not an out of the box feature for many large CRMs, right? And
Right.
I think, it's an upsell motion for folks. I think as businesses grow, this is not what they're thinking about. They're thinking about product market fit in the early days. They're thinking about
Right.
selling, and the further down the road that you go without thinking about, again, the data structure, you end up having to go back and cleaning certain things up, which again, when we think about the sequencing of problems, that is not one that you're thinking about early on. You're proving the business out. You're doing what you need to do. But I do think the legacy CRMs do have a fair amount of work to do to simplify this.
Right.
Should be earlier plans, but thinking about us as a SaaS business, right? RepeatMD is a SaaS business. Every business in SaaS, whether they're working on the teams internally, whether they're out talking to investors, everyone has an upsell motion, whether it's today, whether it's in the future. So a lot of the quote to cash, whether it's amendments, upsells, downsells, it's if you're not thinking about that up front, there's a lot of rework to be done, after the fact. So my take would be fewer systems, fewer connection points, do it earlier. I think you're seeing that with HubSpot acquiring Cashflow to create a more integrated platform type solution so that everything is connected and make life easier. So I'll pause there and see if you have questions.
I like your approach to it, and we spoke about the HubSpot and cash flow acquisition, and you had talked fewer systems, fewer connectivity touch points, and that makes a lot of sense, because more the systems, more connectivity issues, more sync gaps arises. You're trying to figure out that how do you take the data from here to this system to that system. So a lot of data synchronization issues comes in. Reporting and mapping different performance metrics becomes a challenge, because the way a CRM looks at regions, for example, let's say they look at like let's say look at North America, LATAM, they look at Europe, they look at APAC, or they vis-a-vis an ERP looking at similar metrics, let's say for collections, right? The way an ERP looks at from a national identifier kind of a perspective, while a CRM looks at from a sales perspective, right? A sales guy or a salesperson will believe that this should be categorized in a particular entity or in a geography, right? So the way the regions are calculated, the way your point of contacts are mentioned, right? You have different kind of people managing a CRM and an ERP. How do you map them, right? So from that perspective, these issues, the sync issues, multiply if there are multiple systems. So fewer system, fewer connectivity. Completely, I agree with that. And we also covered. I mean, you are migrating towards. So you have a point over here, John.
No, no, I was 100% agreeing with you. I would say even in addition to regions, you think about product catalogs matching between CRM and ERP, and really importantly, account hierarchies, right?
Right.
Parent accounts, locations. For us, we sell a lot to small businesses, but
Mm.
as markets evolve, a lot of our small business clients evolve into more enterprise clients, right? How do those account hierarchies translate when you were building your system for small business? Now you have 5, 10 location plus accounts. How does that work? We work with franchises, we work with multi-location, and just how that manifests through the system.
Right.
And getting that right early, and going back to the point of why you want to do it early, is when you're growing very quickly, it's a lot harder to get in front of that once there's that momentum, which makes a project like that that much more important to wrap your arms around.
Right. Got it. Right, got it. Great. And I think I also agreed with you with regards to your engagement of Salesforce. I believe Salesforce is a lovely tool in terms of the CPQ, but I also agree with you, there's a strong need of configuring the entire process flow of code to cash rather than only focusing on the CPQ process. And that I believe is going to be a step in the right direction because, yeah, the connectivity as we talked about, right? Fewer systems, data connectivity across point of contact, across catalog, product catalog, regions, accounts, these all connectivity is required. That's why connectivity, the CRM software is working across end to end makes a lot of sense, and that's where the growth is going to be more and more. And yeah, I mean, also you were mentioning about migration from QuickBooks to NetSuite. How has been that experience, or you have already had a planning around it, or you've already been implementing the entire NetSuite
we
process?
we are, and I think part of the decision was to do both systems together, right? So it'll be Salesforce CPQ, it'll be NetSuite. We can talk about the state of AI and kind of third generation finance tools, which is a topic I can speak about for days. But doing it all together, putting in a middleware tool, we ended up selecting Workato to do some of the orchestration between Stripe, our product database, NetSuite, Salesforce, to make sure all of our systems are saying the same things, which
Right.
again, I think the goal there is to make sure that our team, our go-to-market team, our engineering team, whoever needs the information has the same information regardless of where they're looking, right? And you can, that adds a ton of time to people's days, it adds a lot of confusion, it adds risk to decision making as well. So understanding how important that is and how the pieces fit together is key for for projects like that. And to go back to your question from before, I think the other stops along the road have been very helpful in understanding that and the cost of not doing that at the right time.
Got it. Great. And I mean, the technology is always finance technology. Finance tool software has always been evolving, and that's a great space and happening space, expecting a lot of changes around there. And we'd love to know a little bit about your experience at RepeatMD. And, I mean, we talked a little bit about, what RepeatMD does, and we have touched a little bit of your experiences. Would love to very briefly talk about, touch your experience as a CFO and how do you see the future of you as a finance leader as well as RepeatMD's future?
Yeah, so happy to talk about that too. So I've been in the seat now 14 months. We're just going through our second budget cycle now. The business has grown tremendously over the past year. Momentum is very strong. We've crossed over $100 million of transaction volume on our platform, which is very exciting. So our customers are making money, which is one of our core values. Our success is your success, which makes me very happy, and also speaks to the unique value prop that we have. It's a true win-win-win for patients, practices, and us. So we've grown a lot of professional growth in that sense as well. I love the team and have the privilege of working with. So we've actually done a lot of work with the Table Group to put in a new operating system and framework for us to continue to grow and coordinate as a team, which I would highly recommend to teams. This is a relatively early organization. The business is about 3 years old, so everything is somewhat new. So trying to make the decisions and how we set up the foundation for the future across the organization. We talked about it a little bit on the finance side of things when we talk about systems and process, but also as we think about our OS for the business and how we want to implement that over the long term. Those are conversations that we're having now. But ultimately, the things for me and what excited me about the business, I talked about the small business background. We're helping small business gain leverage on their most finite resource, which is time. The number one time people transact on our app is 9 p.m., which is, small business is open 9 to 5. This is actually unlocking, a ton of leverage for them and selling while they sleep, so to speak. So the value prop is strong. We have a lot of opportunity ahead of us, new geographies, new products, new markets. A lot of it is around prioritization. So I think that's, making sure that we are digesting each thing appropriately. And like I said, sequencing things appropriately is really the challenge ahead. But ultimately, love the people that I have the privilege of working with, the folks on the team. Some days, as with every Series A company, it feels like your hair's on fire, but that's also part of what makes it fun. But one of our core values too at RepeatMD is journey before destination. So I find it very important to take a step back and remind myself to enjoy the ride. Not everything is going to go according to plan, never does. I've learned that now multiple times along the road, like we talked about before, but I'm excited for the future and very energized coming into 25.
Right. Love that thought about having, the journey before destination, because, I've been, working on my company since quite some time. And, and as you rightly said, you plan things and things don't go as per plan, then you have to change it. And it always matters that what you're doing. The fun lies in the journey, and rather than seeing the goal. The goals are important, but the journey is which drives you towards the goals, and ultimately you reach the goal because of the journey. Next question, I mean, love to cover a little bit on the accounting software, right? We are talking about, your migration from a QuickBooks to a NetSuite. How has been the migration? What drove you towards taking the decision about migrating towards NetSuite? And how do you see overall? I mean, obviously there are, accounting softwares which are further more complex, like an Infor and an SAP, right? And there's a proper level of journey that happens in a CFO's role as they work in accounting softwares. How do you see your take from, migration from QuickBooks to NetSuite?
Now, just to start off, this is a really exciting time for the office of the CFO. You have
Right.
this very interesting dynamic of legacy systems, your Sages, your NetSuites, your SAPs of the world on one side, and then you have your challengers, right? You have both on the ERP side, tools like Campfire and Rylet, who, I think put out very good products. And but also even further than that on the FP&A side, right? It's the rise of, hey, call me a purist. I still use Excel for probably more than I should today. But there's that evolution of a lot of tools coming out to help make life easier for the office of the CFO. So we're in this renaissance of tooling, which is a topic that I nerd out about a lot along the way. But that's part of the lens of of decision making, right? There's also AI, which we can talk about as part of this as well, and how that gets ingrained into the office of the CFO. That being said, so when we think about the decision making frameworks, when I think about risk and certainty with certain decisions, I would say ERP in general is one that we're looking at. But importantly, it's also talking to industry experts and talking to folks who are very much plugged into the VC PE backed business. So for me, I'm trying to solve for future and eventual liquidity, right? What is the decision that I can make once? I can do it right, and I'll never have to think about changing it ever again, right? And when I think about, we talked about growth for the business in the medium term, it's new geographies, new products that include subsidiaries. So I need something that supports multi-entity, multi-currency, and something that I never want to have to think about ever again. That's where when I talk to our advisors, and it's very important to have advisors and folks who have their finger on the pulse of markets and trends. The investor-backed companies. I think the consensus, and again, putting aside Campfire and Rylet and others who are definitely taking share away, the consensus is still that that the NetSuite or Sage path is the one that is recommended for us, particularly for our business in particular. NetSuite, I think if we were a more straightforward B2B SaaS business, there would be more of an argument for the new tooling. But for us, we are not only B2B SaaS, but we also have a marketplace and fintech aspect to it as well, which adds a little bit of complexity, which I think made me a little bit more comfortable going the Netsuite route. That being said, there's a ton of opportunity. There's a lot of areas for experimentation with new tooling. So I think while we talk about legacy ERP, the experimentation for new AI tools, I saw the company Tabs just raised their Series A. You think about experimentation in places like accounts receivable and collections. I think it's a fantastic place and an area that we're going to be looking at here in Q1 as a place to find a point solution that is this, call it, third generation FP&A tooling. Same thing on the FP&A side, right? I still write variance commentary myself. AI can certainly help write it, but I think we're a little bit away from that being set it and forget it. But definitely in the market for FP&A tooling to help make life easier and gain leverage for myself and the G&A function. But I've seen a lot of ChatGPT wrappers out there as well. So I think it's all taken with a grain of salt as far as picking your spots where you can see innovation and where to make a decision that's a very well-trodden path. There's a lot of folks that have gone the path, have gone all the way to liquidity with the NetSuite. That list is a lot shorter with the newcomers, and I think I'd rather pick my battles elsewhere as far as experimentation rather than core ERP.
Got it. No, great answer. I mean, we touched upon multiple points. We touched upon the tech in the office of the CFO. We talked about accounting softwares. We talked about the entire FP&A angle. We talked about you being a B2B and a marketplace tech. Hence, there is a need of a NetSuite, and there is a certain level of risk angle also involved. You being sure about the accounting software that you're using, and we talked about the FP&A angle, and the AI applications for it. And we have also spoken about the AR collections product of Inflow. We have also had that discussion. So seeing a lot of overall focus on embracing technology, AI, and multiple other evolutionary technology. There is a fine balance between having a certain level of lower risk with technology as well as having an innovation angle as tech coming in actually to solve problem statements, right? So loved your on the accounting software and multiple other finance tech tools that are being used and which you would be planning to use, and considering multiple things like the risk, the future prospects, the problem statements that you want to solve, the cost aspect, and multiple aspects. Yeah, you had a point.
Yeah, it's an interesting point, that you made as well. It's also, the question for the organization is, do you go with a more enterprise grade AI solution tying finance into the rest of the business? Do we look just within the finance organization? I think as an absolute baseline, our team and my team is encouraged to, be developing their, AI skills, whether it's ChatGPT for emails, whether it's, helping to identify accounts to call for collections, whatever the case is. There's certainly that foundational element of making sure that we're ingraining AI into our workflows. There's a lot being thrown at folks. There's a lot of LinkedIn DMs. There's a lot of tooling out there that is coming to market. And I think it is incumbent on myself and trying to figure out what the right solution is and for what function, right? And picking your spots in terms of innovation. Ultimately, I come back to, hey, how can we make the foundational data for training a model? It's going to get trained on accurate information. Otherwise, you're not going to get the output that you're looking for anyway.
Got it. Great. What is the uniqueness about your answer is it has a lot of tech angle with regards to your answer. That's really great and refreshing to know, because I mean, it's not only about bringing in tech for the sake of technology, but it's also justifying it in terms of multiple angles, right? So that's why I love the answer that you gave. And going to the final questions in our podcast, you have seen a lot of growth and you have recently seen a lot of challenges and journeys across different finance roles, and there are multiple finance professionals who will be seeing this podcast, who are seeing this podcast, and would love to know what is your advice for them to grow to a finance leadership role.
Well, say a few things come to mind for me with that. We talked about the concept of range before. We talked about the different stops along the road, trying to become as well-rounded of an operator as you can be. But I would say one is developing range. And, by that, being a person that people come to help them solve their challenges, right?
Right.
If you want to be that person who, If you're able to help them in multiple areas, they'll come to you more often. You'll be able to be more helpful to them and help move the business forward. I would say to get there, and this one is biased because of the path that I have taken, but always be willing to try new things. You're going to learn something good, something bad. You're going to learn something along the way. And you as an operator are the product of all of your experiences. So the more varied experiences that you will have, you will grow, and you will stretch yourself consistently to not being surprised. There's always new things that will come down the pipeline, but that list of things that you haven't seen before will continue to to lessen and lessen over time. With that being said, always have a point of view and come prepared. Preparation is something. Control what you can control. You can always control preparation. You can always control your effort. Nothing will ever go according to plan. We talked about the macro piece. You'll never be able to control macro dynamics, right? It's a fool's errand to go try, but you can certainly control the controllables. And that's, again, preparation, work style, and things like that. But also, and the last thing is enjoy the ride. I talked about journey before destination. That one resonates with me very much so. I have to remind myself of that, often as well. But to take a step back and enjoy the ride, not everything goes according to plan.
Got it. I think my takeaway would be journey beyond destination. I loved it. The fact about being curious, accepting that there are uncertainties and there are things that you can't, that are not under your control, is always the best approach to, be agile and have an open mind to be curious, to ask the right questions and come up with an answer. Think beyond the uncertainties of the business. I think we are drawing to the end of the podcast. So, John, a really fascinating conversation we had. Loved the way that you have expressed and articulated your thoughts and opinions on your own journey and what it takes to be a financial leader like you, and especially your approach on technology, your embracing technology and seeing technology as unlocking powers, unlocking multiple capabilities, and also managing it with risks and multiple other angles that are involved with the enterprise. So I had a great time shooting the podcast with you, John.
Thanks so much for having me. This was fun, and I would love to do it again sometime too. And wish you all the best, and thanks again.
Thanks, John. So we draw to the end of the podcast of the eighth episode, and looking forward to have you over for the next episode. So hope you've had a great time. Till then, goodbye.